Another great song, isn't that? I'm glad to be in that new world since the Lord saved me. It's so good, Sister Mary, that you're able to be back up there, right where you belong. You can be seated. Tonight we're going to, on Words to Live By, we're going to talk about, y'all can be seated, I'm sorry. I thought y'all were getting ready to testify. That's all right too. We're talking about goodness. This is one of my favorite fruits. Is the fruit of goodness. It's really one of my favorites. It's one that a lot of times when we read the scriptures, we think, oh well, I can't do this. But you can. And I'll give you some definition of why. Look at what it says in Galatians 5. We know at the beginning, it says, when the Holy Spirit controls our lives, He will produce this kind of fruit in us. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. We've talked about those. And then goodness. Goodness. The word goodness comes from the Greek word, a word we'll never use, agathosune. Now, that's not something we'll ever say. You're not Greek. I'm not Greek. We're not. It's easier to read it than it is to say it. The word simply means goodness, virtue, beneficence. I go back to Acts chapter 26, and one of the famous story of King Agrippa. And in that story, King Agrippa says to the Apostle Paul, he says, almost thou hast persuaded me to become a Christian. Now that sounds simple enough. When King Agrippa announced this to Paul, that he had almost persuaded him to become a Christian, for us it's a peculiar statement because we get that all mixed up. Here's where we get it mixed up in modern day vernacular, because we make it synonymous. If somebody comes to the altar to get saved, that makes them a Christian. Being saved and becoming a Christian are two different things. Now, certainly salvation, you need to be saved before you can become a Christian, right? But not all people who are saved act Christian, do they? Let's be honest. But here's what Agrippa was saying to him. What he was saying to Paul, and what he meant was, almost thou persuadest me to be Christ-like or to be good. You see, Agrippa saw this in Paul's life, and he heard the testimony. And yes, he knew he needed salvation, but he also saw something that pointed him that says, boy, this is a different way. The way of living a Christian life, that Christian life that's a good life, because that's what being a Christian is being Christ-like. That's why they called them Christians at Antioch. Not just because they were saved, but because they acted like Jesus. Now, we know that Jesus had this innate goodness about him. And that doesn't mean that he wasn't real. That doesn't mean that sometimes he wasn't blunt, but he was always good. In fact, when Jesus tells us there's none good, no, not one, you see, he is the only one that was good. If we are going to be saved in itself, it's one thing, but being a Christian and being Christ-like means we've got to be good. Have you ever, I used to pastor a woman that she started raising her two grandkids, and she, those grandkids, sometimes they were rowdy, they were little boys. One of the grandkids they got right at birth, he was okay. The second grandkid they didn't get till he was 18 months old. And this is how they found the second grandkid. They found the second grandkid. His mother, their daughter, had left him in a hotel room, abandoned at 8 months old, and left raw meat with this child. This child was eating raw hamburger meat, raw food in a hotel room at 18 months old by himself. Found him with feces all over him. And so they took him and they cleaned him up, and you can imagine, and they didn't see this kid basically for the first year and a half of his life. And so this kid had a year and a half of abuse already stuck in him. And so when they would they would do things. They would bring him to church. Guess what? He was rowdy. He was a rowdy little boy. Now, the other little boy was just as good as he could be. He was sweet as he could be. And his little brother was mean as he can be. Well, you know what? If I was eating raw hamburger meat in the hotel room by myself, I'd probably be a little rowdy too. And so she would look at him and she would call him by his name. In fact, his name, oddly enough, was Christian. A name that meant Christ-like. And she would look at Christian and she would say, "You're bad." And when he did something bad, she would point to him and she'd say, "The devil's going to get you." Well, I'm always a pastor. So sometimes I have to tell people what I see and what I think. And I finally looked at her and I called her by name and I said, "Sis, quit telling that boy he's bad. He's been through an ordeal. We're not trying to excuse the things that he's doing as he's growing up, but quit telling him he's bad. Quit sowing those seeds into his life. Yes, he needs discipline, but he doesn't need to be constantly told he's bad. You need to build a life of goodness for this child, a life that of positive things in his life. His name is Christian. His name means be Christ-like. Let's teach him those things in his life." And yeah, but up to the time I left, he was rowdy. He had some go-arounds and stuff like that. But you know, we saw him begin to grow as a child, and now he's probably 16, 17 years old, and you know, I'm sure he's much different now. But that's what it means to be Christ-like, is to be good. I want to take you to this in the Amplified version of the Bible, where it says, "But the fruit of the Spirit," when we get to the word goodness in the Amplified, in a parenthesis by that, it says benevolence. So I want to talk to you for a few minutes on what happens if you are good. What do good people do? What do people who are Christian and try to do good do? Christians who want to do good are going to be benevolent. They're going to be benevolent. If you're going to be good, you're going to have to be benevolent. What does it mean to be truly good? A truly good person is going to be a benevolent person. Now this means that good person is not interested as much in their way as they are in the way of helping others. Now I know that for most of us, we automatically think benevolence is when we are giving away stuff, or we're giving food, or we're giving money, or something like that. And those certainly can be benevolent things. Feeding people and so forth. Those are certainly benevolent things that we need to be a part of. But benevolence is some other things. Sometimes I have to be benevolent in my relationships, don't I? And what I mean is, by being benevolent in my relationships, I have to sometimes prefer somebody else. I don't want to go eat Mexican tonight. I don't want to go to the Mexican restaurant. I've already ate anyhow. Sister Pink, you may want to go to the Mexican. She didn't say anything about going. If Katie Beth were here, I promise you she's going to be going to one of the Mexican restaurants here in town tonight. It don't matter if it was Wednesday night, if it was Christmas Day, she'd want to go. And so she's going to pick, she wants her cheese dip. She's wanting her cheese dip. And so sometimes you have to, anybody ever had more than one kid with you that you had to take, and you were on a trip and you had to decide on where to stop to eat? Anybody ever had that? Well, I had 3 to raise, so guess what? When we were on a trip, we had 5 different opinions in our vehicle on where to stop and eat. Right? I mean, we had 5 different. Now, when I grew up, if we went somewhere, if it was me and my mom and my dad, and it never was they were 2 brothers, but my dad never went anywhere anyhow. But if we ever did go somewhere, there was only one opinion on where we ate. I promise you. There was only one opinion on where we ate. That was McDonald's. That's the only place my dad ever would go. McDonald's. That was it. And so there was no, Dad, I want to go to Burger King, or I want to go here. It was McDonald's. We were just glad to get to go to McDonald's. I mean, that would thank God. If I was with my grandma Panky, there was one opinion on where we'd go, burger broil. Why? Because on Tuesdays they had 19-cent hamburgers and or 29-cent cheeseburgers if you had to pay an extra dime. And it was like pulling teeth to get an extra dime out of my grandma Panky. Benevolence, though, in that relationship is sometimes saying, I prefer somebody else. In other words, I'll go without what I want so that you can do something else. And that's a hard thing. But it is also helping other people in different ways. It's also seeing a need and meeting a need. We live in a world with lots and lots of needs, lots and lots of hurting people. And as a church, we want to be benevolent in those ways. We want to be able to do that. I don't know if you're aware of it. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, because we have given out food over years and helped people. Did you know that out of all the churches in Blytheville, in the Blytheville area, one business in this town picked one church to use to be benevolent and to help people with. They picked us. And that's KFC. We don't advertise for KFC or anything like that. But KFC, they don't throw away their chicken when they overcook. They freeze it, and once a week they contact us. We go pick up all their chicken, and we're able to give it to people and help people. And do that with it. And I'm talking good stuff. I don't know how they can make a profit with all the chicken they're giving us for free. And then, did you know that a percentage of their proceeds that they take for the whole year, at the end of the year, they will send to us to put in our food pantry? You know why? You know why that is? Because we've never turned anybody down for food. We've never turned anybody down. Now, there's 110 churches in Blytheville, Arkansas alone. And that doesn't mean that they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, but because of your benevolence that you've given to people so much that a business chose to do that for us. By the way, we got so much chicken right now. If you need some chicken after church, you want to take it home, put it in the oven, get some. If you need some chicken sandwiches, did any of you many of the chicken sandwiches Monday night? Hey, that's still good meat, man. If you want some chicken sandwich meat, hit me up after church, because our freezers are full and we need to get rid of some because next Monday they will call us again. And so we can give it to you. They don't care who we give it to. So if you want some chicken, see me after church. And you don't have to pay for it. All you have to do is know how to use an oven. All right? But it's being benevolent. Look what Matthew says this. This is the key to benevolence. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. In other words, give to one who asks you and don't turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. That's so counter to our society, isn't it? We're told if we're going to minister to people, Jesus said this to us. He said, if you're going to be benevolent, don't do the bare minimum, do extra. If somebody needs a bottle of water, give them a case of water. If somebody needs $10 worth of gas, give them $25 worth of gas. That's what he is saying there. That's what he's telling us there. But he says, allow yourself, hear me, this is what he said, allow yourself to be taken advantage of in the world's eyes. Because you're not being taken advantage of in God's eyes. That's what he is telling us. That's the benevolent. Because here's what benevolence, true benevolence does. It's kind, it's compassionate, it's non-judgmental. And I know it's so easy to judge people that are in need. And I understand that there are folks that do take advantage of the system. One of the greatest things we've done in the city, in the Ministerial Alliance, we started 10 years ago. The Holy Week services that we do every year. How many of you get to come to the Holy Week services? So I love the Holy Week services. We started those Holy Week services to promote Easter for one. But we decided, and I took it from a model of what we were doing in Marion and West Memphis with our ministerial fellowship, that we were all being hit up with, all the church were being hit up with benevolence, and a lot of times the same people over and over. So we said, we're going to have a central fund that we can start with, that we can meet the needs as an alliance, so we have accountability. And so every one of those offerings go to help people in need. And we do that as benevolence. So for the last 10 years, going on 11 now, for the last 10 years, we've had a fund that's just through the Ministerial Alliance that's to give out. Guess what? We were able to, the crusade that we had this year, we under budgeted for. And what I mean by that, we set a budget for a certain amount that we thought it would cost us, and we went way under budget. And the giving with that was so incredible that we were able to put thousands of dollars into benevolence to help the community and to still bless the evangelists. What an amazing thing. That was a God thing. And we've been able to give to different needs in the community. Pastor Rigney over Ignite, they were able to take Ignite and give to other benevolent ministries. And the Ministerial Alliance helps with that. What am I saying? There's great benevolence that takes place. When you do it, God blesses it. And it's not just money, it's different things. It's doing it in a non-judgmental way. And why? Because sometimes people are in trouble and they got themselves in trouble. They got themselves messed up. Have any of you ever messed yourself up and needed help getting out? I have. I've messed myself up getting and needed help getting out. I've dug plenty of holes that I forgot to throw the shovel away and kept digging and really needed somebody to throw me a rope. And thank God I've always had somebody throw me a rope. A benevolent person looks for needs. They don't just wait for needs, they look for them. And they're willing to give. Give you a little example of how God works in goodness. Back in 2001, when we went to Marion, they had a beginning of a bus ministry there, and they used an old van. I don't know how old the van was. And the first Sunday I was there, I had two ladies that were driving the church van. One lady, Sister Shirley, the other lady, Sister Ruby. They were driving the church van, picking up kids. And they get back to the church late, and the church van stalled over the railroad tracks. That's not a good place for it to stall, especially when you got kids on it. And finally got somebody, they went and got it, went and helped them. I'm new to it. And the very first meeting we ever had at the church after I got there, they've been trying to raise money for a new church van. And so we had a meeting the very next week. We bought a new church van and said, what are we going to do with this old van? I thought the van was pitiful. Another church was trying to do bus ministry. They wanted the van. And they contacted us and they said, we want to give you $2,500 for a van. I said, that piece of junk. I felt guilty that somebody approached me and said that this church wanted to give $2,500 for this church van. I said, I felt real, real guilty about it. And so we had the meeting to buy the other van, and then we made the motion in that same meeting we were going to sell it, and I just really felt bad about it. And one of the men said, Pastor, can we just give that van? And I was new there. I didn't know how the protocol was. And I said, please, let's sow it with that other church. And so instead of us selling that van and using it as part of the money for the other van that we bought, we gave that $2,500 van to the other church so they could do ministry with it. You know what happened the very next month? The very next month, we broke our tithe record by $2,500 because of being given. We had an organ, a great one of those organs. Now, our church didn't use organs, but this was an organ that was really designed and would go really well in an African-American church. And the reason was because they could take it and they could do stuff with it that we weren't going to do. It was an organ that was sitting there. And this pastor, his name Brother Donald Brown, came to meet with me one day, and his church wanted to buy it. Let me tell you the name of the church. The name of the church was so big you couldn't put it on a business card. It was Straightway Apostolic Pentecostal Temple of Deliverance. I loved going and preaching at that church. I'd never met Brother Brown, but he said, I want that organ. His son, 16 years old, went and got up on that organ and started playing. And this is what he started. He started playing on that organ. It had Leslie speakers with it, and he started going, bam, 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 bam. I said, okay, it sounds like that belongs to them. Because when it was going to get played at our church, it was going to sound like it was in Cobb Funeral Home. And so they kept trying to raise money. They did chicken dinners. They did everything in the world to try to raise money. And finally, after about 6 months, that organ still sat in our church, and they were trying to raise $3,500 because that was the agreed upon price, $3,500 to buy that organ. And he called me. He said, Pastor, he said, we can't do it. He called me just before I had a council meeting, and I go in my council meeting and I said, Brother Brown they can't buy the organ. And all my council had been to the church when we had special services there. And I started to say something to them. I think, before I could get a word out, one of my council members said, Pastor, can I say something? I said, sure. And he said, I feel like we should give that organ to that church. And then all 7 guys to the man said, we feel like we should give that organ to that church. And so we agreed to do it. I called him that night. I said, Brother Brown, I said, we're going to give you this organ. And he said, but we can't pay. I said, we're going to give it to you. I said, there's the caveat. We don't deliver. You got to come pick it up. And so he came and they picked that organ up. You know what happened? This is the way God works. We didn't do it for this reason. The very next month, we broke our tithe record by $3,500. The amount, Sister Connie, that we were going to sell the organ for, God gave us the money anyway. It came from a different way. We don't understand that. Man, I started looking for every piece of junk we had that we didn't use. I was wanting to give it all away. Because I said, you just never, because you know what? Benevolence, God blesses benevolence. God blesses it. And that's what he's going to do. You know what? We have opportunities to be benevolent. And I'm longer on the benevolence than I probably need to be. This coming up year, Operation Christmas Child. What a wonderful way to be benevolent, you know? Yes, they've increased shipping. It's going to be $10 a box now. But you know what? That's to fill up a box and to pay $10 to send it. We sing the testimony of those beautiful kids that celebrate getting a box full of socks. Let me tell you, when I was growing up, my grandma Panky, she'd give us a gift. We either got a bag of underwear or a bag of socks. That's all she'd ever give us for Christmas. And I never celebrated my gifts from my grandma. I never celebrated those because you know what? I was selfish. But these little kids in Guatemala, or those kids in Indonesia, or those kids in one of the African countries, they get a box filled with socks or a homemade jump rope, and they celebrate. And you know what? They also celebrate that box that was sent to them because they can use that box to put their clothes in or something, to put their toothbrushes in. And we got an opportunity to be benevolent. Or at Christmas time, the food boxes that we do to give to 25 or 30 families that you guys always sacrifice for. And I'm by faith this year, I'm wanting to do 35 boxes. And again, we do 2 weeks worth of groceries in that so that we can bless folks and minister to them. And why? That because benevolence is something that's important. You know what? We don't do it to get a reward from them. We do it because God wants us to be good. And there's so many other ways that you can do that. And all of you find different ways to be good to people in different ways. But the other thing goodness is, it's a virtue. It relates to virtue. When we talk about goodness, we're talking about virtue or moral excellence. Look at what Paul says. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of a good report, if there is any virtue and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. You know, by nature, we as Christians should try to keep a good name by how we conduct our lives in private and in public, shouldn't we? We should try to keep a good name. We should try to we should try to keep a moral virtue. does it does hurt the church. And I'm not talking about the whole body. I'm not talking about just an individual church. It hurts the church when we turn on the news and we hear of a defrocked preacher who was famous and some kind of insidious moral failure. It hurts the church, doesn't it? You know why? It should hurt the church. We should never celebrate in immorality. When we see a preacher that's fallen or a Christian that's fallen, we shouldn't sit back there and we sit on the news and say, oh, I knew that guy was a phony or that guy was a phony. You know, we should grieve over that. We should grieve over those things. Why? Because in us, there's not going to be perfection, but there should be this desire to be good. You remember when your parents would tell you, hey, be good? You know what they were telling you? Be moral. Be moral. And so we got to guard our reputation. You know, in 2017, after he had taken office as vice president, Mike Pence was raked over the coals because he would never go take his secretary to lunch or go eat lunch privately with any woman or with anybody that was a woman, because and remember the media said, oh, well, he's keeping women from being able to elevate. No, he's not. What he was doing is he valued his marriage. And he valued his marriage so much that he didn't want to ever do anything to mess up that reputation. You know, well, that's a good thing. I don't care what the media says. See, the media, they don't look at things the way we look at things. But I want my reputation to my wife to be good, and I want it to be that way in the community. I don't want to flirt with anybody, and I don't want anybody flirting with me. I don't have time for that, and I don't want it. And you know, there's only one person I want to flirt with, and that's her. And I will flirt with her from time to time. You know why? Because I've been flirting with her ever since I saw her in the McDonald's drive-thru. Mike, you knew that was coming, didn't you? Oh, okay. Mike caught that up. No, my dad wouldn't have let me. It was a good thing my dad took me to McDonald's. Okay. Let's click on that, Mike. Virtue's a necessary ingredient to exercise our faith. Sometimes the Greek word for virtue is used to express the idea of power and strength. The Bible says, and the whole multitude sought to touch him, for there went virtue out of him. So it's more than just the moral part, but there's power and strength. So guess what? There is strength in goodness. There's strength in your goodness. Don't ever think that being good is being weak, because it is not. Being good is strong and powerful. And you have to be strong to be good. You have to be strong to be good. Nobody's good all the time. In fact, it leads us to this. There is no one that's good. Now that sounds hopeless, doesn't it? Jesus said, Paul says here, no one is good, not even one. The fact that there is none good, it doesn't sound good for anybody, except for the fact that we're not good in and of ourselves. What is it that makes us good? Brother Ricky, what makes us good is when we come to Christ, then it changes things. I have that godly, Christ-like example that I strive to live. And I fall short many times. And you fall short. Now listen to me. You're not going to be perfect. You're not going to always be good. There are going to be times where you let yourself down and you're going to let others down. There's no doubt about that. That is going to happen. But understand this. Understand this, because God is good all the time. He has given us the ability to be good some of the time. And I would rather be good some of the time than none of the time. I know we have our earthly limits, we have our even our spiritual limits at this point in time, but even though God's the only one that's good, He didn't leave this thing unattainable for us. He didn't say you can't be good. You can't be good on your own. That's what He's saying. You can't be good without His attributes. In fact, what He is telling, in fact, He wouldn't have gave us these fruits that we can exemplify in our life if they weren't attainable. I thank God for this, to be able to have the fruit of goodness that operates. I do care what people think. I've heard people say, well, it doesn't matter what people think. Yeah, I do care what people think. I'm not in pretense, but I do care what people think. I don't want them thinking in the community that, oh, there goes Brother Panky. He's a jerk, mean, he's not good to anybody. Now, that doesn't mean that I won't stand up. And that doesn't mean that I won't stand up to a politician if they are, and if I disagree with the politician and some of their belief. Can I tell you? I got invited today to a pastor's conference for a particular politician. I'm not going because I won't support any politician who's pro-choice. I won't do it. I will support one that's pro-choice. It's a line I won't cross. I won't support a politician who doesn't believe that there is a set gender, boy and girl. I won't support those things. Now, I can still love them and I'll still be kind to them. And I don't mind. I don't mind telling them. They ask me who I'm going to vote for. I don't mind telling them I'm not going to vote for them. I had a politician one time in my church. He was a state representative, and I told him when he ran the first time. I asked him, I said, "Are you pro-life?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Are you pro-family?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Here's the thing." I said, "If you're going to put a sign in my yard," because it was my yard, it wasn't the church's yard, it was my yard. So if you're going to put a sign in my yard, here's all I ask. Is if there's an issue, I want you to, and I have to contact you all. You don't have to do what I say. I want you to listen to me. That's fair, isn't it? If I'm going to let somebody put a sign in my yard, they should at least hear me out. There was an issue taking place with gambling in West Memphis and in Hot Springs. Those were the only two communities, and they were getting ready to vote for it in the State House, and they had a couple of weeks, and I called him, no answer. I emailed him, no response, and never would respond to me. I emailed him, "This is what I believe on this, and I would like to get your response." Never would respond to me since 3 times. And then I saw how he voted. Well, he was running for office again. And this guy went to my church. Son. And he came to me, he said, "Well, I come to put a sign in your yard." I said, "You're not putting a sign in my yard." He said, "I can't put a sign in your yard." I said, "No, you can't put one in my yard." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because you went back on your word. Not because you voted for the gambling bill, because you refused to even acknowledge that I had an opinion on it after you told me you would at least acknowledge it. And I have an opinion, and it's not going to be, that sign's not going to be in my yard." I have him as a friend on Facebook today. He's a different man now. He's got a family and kids now. His politics may not be different, but my point is, you can stand up for what you believe in and still be good. You can do that. The politicians may not like it. That's okay. I'm not there to satisfy them. But I do care what people think about me. I care if they think that I'm a compassionate and caring person. I care if they think that I'm a good person. Why? Because reputation is important. In fact, Brother Eddie, we're told in the Bible that a pastor's reputation is important. That it's incredibly important. That we have to guard those things. That we have to be of good report in the community, in good standing. But because God is love, because God is just, because God is merciful, because God is compassionate, because God is powerful, because God is benevolent, because God is holy, because God is able, because God is righteous, because God is faithful, we can be good. It can operate in you. I challenge you this week. I challenge you. Find an opportunity and be good to somebody. Be benevolent in some way. If it means paying for somebody's meal and paying it forward in the drive-thru, or if it means being kind, being good and kind, it needs to go hand in hand. But if it means being good in a manner that causes you to have to sacrifice, I challenge you to do that this week. You can be good and you can be right all at the same time. Michael, would you come up here? I asked Mike, we're going to anoint a prayer cloth that he can take to his mama and believe for her healing. Sister Michael, you mind shutting this off as we get ready to do this? Again, we ask that you continue to remember these needs in prayer. Sister Wanda, Sister Jones, Little Abby, Phyllis, Travis, Jeanette. Remember Kelly in prayer. Remember my mom in prayer. And then